We are also looking at the loft object today. I know that in the lecture the loft might have seemed confusing or difficult, and it does have a learning curve. It's one of the more tricky ones because it does involve having multiple splines and being careful of the order you put them in, but it's super powerful. It's really useful. So I thought a good way to practice this would be to build some chess pieces. You can choose one. These are the references that I included. I think they're a good place to start because they are simpler shapes. Sometimes you see these, like this one's a rook, and sometimes you see that with the little castle top. That would be a little bit harder right now. So I picked this more modern one for you guys to use because you can see where uh, there are definite shape changes, and you can say, okay, well, I could see how I could put some splines of different sizes here and there to create the pedestal look. And you could use like circles and whatnot to create the shape. So I think this will be a good reference to use. I also included this one of a king if you want to challenge yourself a little bit more. Because this will involve different shapes, where this one you could probably get away with a bunch of circle splines. Um, this one obviously has a different shape at the top. Yes, you can use a lot of circle splines to create this with a loft, but once you get to the top here, you're probably going to have to um, use some rectangles to make this shape. Um, and you could also, in the grand scheme of things, if you wanted to work with a more complex chess piece, you could probably use some primitives and combine them together for the more decorative parts. But as long as you do the majority of the body of the chess piece as a loft, then that's good with me. The goal here is not to simply create the chess piece, but to use a loft to do it. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that when you're starting out, you use one of these references. But if you're looking for a challenge, if you think you understand how the loft works, if after you watch this short video you get it, you think you're good, then feel free to challenge yourself. But I wanted to make sure that you had references that were that would work well for the loft itself. Okay, so I'm going to import this one into Cinema 4D. So go over to Cinema, and I'm going to go to my front view, options, configure. So options, configure back. I choose my reference. Okay, make my front view bigger. I'm going to use the white one because the black one is a little harder to see where the edges are. So I'm going to shift that over to 0, 0, 0. Okay. And the reason I do that is because XYZ at 0, that's where all the objects pop in. So they're centered in the scene at 0. So that's where the loft is going to pop in. That's where the splines are going to pop in. So I don't need to do extra work by keeping this off to the side. And then like every spline that I pop in there like this is going to be here, and I have to move it over. That's way more extra work. It makes more sense to start out and to move my reference first, so that I don't have to. So this is placed in the right so this is placed in the right location, and then all of my objects that I put into the scene, they're working with my reference. They're starting in the same place. That ends up being quite nice. Okay, so I'm going to lower the opacity here again, like 75. Okay, and I'm going to get myself a circle spline to start. Okay, and it's the plane for the spline is an XY. I'm going to turn it so that way it's flat. Okay, I want it to be flat in the X. So you could do that with rotation, but you could also do that easily if you go to your circle spline and you go to plane. And I'm going to change that to, I want it to be in X and Z. Okay, and there we have my line. So just so you can see what that looks like over here, you can see there's my spline. So if you want to model in multi-view, you can do that. If you just want to focus here for now, I'm assuming that this chess piece is round, not oval or something like that. So I'm not really going to adjust the spline, the shape of it, and make it more like more of a ellipse. I'm going to just resize it to match where the um, different sections, the different details are here for my chess piece. Okay, and you can start from the top or you can start from the bottom. Just make sure you're going in order. As soon as you start going in one direction, you want to keep going in that direction. Okay, so I want to make sure that as I'm going, I want to make sure that as I add more splines, I keep going. If I'm working from the bottom up, that's what I do. I don't, if I need to add an extra circle in there to create a particular shape, in my loft, if it needs more structure or something like that, and I need to add an additional spline, I want to make sure that I do that and I reorder it so that I make sure that it's not out of order with the splines that I already have set up. And that's the really important part, and maybe the more confusing part with the loft is that you have to make sure you're putting things in order. The very first spline that you make is going to be at the bottom. So that's why I kind of like to start bottom up, because that's sort of how the loft is going to be organized. The first spline I make is going to be at the bottom. The newer ones are going to be on top of it. So I think that makes sense intuitively to start with the bottom, with the base of it. Okay, so I'm going to make it smaller. So I hit T for the shortcut to scale it. I'm going to scale it down, and I'm going to move it up. So, and I'm going to do a lot of shortcuts for this. T is to scale, and you have R is rotate, which I'm going to ignore. E is move. Okay, and I'm just going to place that. All right. Now I'm gonna be pretty precise here. Okay, and wherever I see that something is changing in size or in dimension or whatnot, I am going to put a new spline for that. Okay. Now I notice that my spline is here, and it makes me think my reference is a little bit off. So if you need to adjust your reference, again, I want to make sure that my reference works for where my objects are coming in. So this is a little bit off from 0, so I just want to tweak that. Okay, make it easier for myself, because again, if I copy and paste this spline or if I add new ones, I want to make sure that um, they are the ones I don't really have to move. I don't want to have to move every spline that I make. If I have to use 15 splines here, I don't want to have to move every single one of them. Okay, so I've got my base. I'm going to copy paste. Okay, and now I'm going to move up. Okay, and you could jump and you could do sort of the rough big moves first, or you could sort of go little by little. I like to sort of go, and if I see like a detail, I'll try and take care of it right away. So this has like a little bit of a lip here, so I'm going to do that now. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay, and then I'm going to move up and copy paste. I'll get 3 of them, and then I'll get my loft out. So pull this one up. Okay, and I'm going to scale that down a little bit to meet there. There we go. All right. And it has a top there too, so maybe I'll just do another one. So copy, paste, move that one up. Okay, and this one is... Now you're probably going to need one for this top lip, and you're going to probably need another one for this inside where it comes in like that. I'm going to put this here first, and then I'll get the loft, and then we'll come back to it and see what we need. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to my perspective view so you can see what's going to happen. So this is what I've got going on right now. That's what has worked out with those various splines that I have put so far. I've got the start of this little base here. Okay, so it's 4 of them, and you can see how they're grouped together to try and create the different edges that you're seeing. So I'm going to go, there's no geometry obviously now, this is just spline. So if you were to try and render like preview perspective mode, nothing's going to show up. Okay, so I got to go over here to my menu and hold it down and get a loft. Okay, and I have to make sure I put them in the right order. So I like to, at this point, I like to usually rename them, make my life easier. So I'm going to rename the first one circle bottom, or bottom base or something like that, so that I know that's the first one. And then every other one, I could be more specific as I get through there, but at least I know this first one is the very, very bottom one that I started with. So that goes into the loft first, followed by circle 1, followed by circle 2, and you can see as I'm throwing them in there, the shape is building up, which is pretty cool. Circle 3, okay, and there's my base. Okay, and if I compare it to what I've got over here, that's looking pretty good. You could actually see where the loft is, and you can see that that edge is actually looks like it's coming in there. So I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, and then this is what it looks like over here. Okay, now you can see that it's not very round. Okay, there's a lot of angles to it. That would be going to the loft. And you could either change the subdivisions here or you can use a subdivision surface. I'm going to worry about that later. Right now, I just want to get the shape. I could worry about smoothing out the geometry after the fact. Okay, right now I just want to get the shape of my model. That should be something that I can take care of with the loft subdivisions, or I could use a subdivision surface to help me smooth that out. It's not really dependent on the splines that I'm using currently. So now the shape, you can see the pedestal here, we could line up pretty quickly. But you see here, this shape now has a curved part to it. And there's also a little bit of a dip in here. So let's see what happens if we put the spline in the middle of this more rounded area of the chess piece. And then if the shape changes and connects, then we will have to add more splines. And that's what's usually going to happen with the loft. If you don't get it to follow the shape that you're trying to create and it gets too blocky or it connects in a way that you don't want to, you'll have to add more splines. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste a spline, bring it up here, put it in the middle of this rounded part, extend it. Okay, when you copy and paste, it automatically does not go into the loft. It goes outside the loft. So you have to then bring that into the loft. Okay, and you can see here that it connected it. It didn't follow the curve. So you will need more splines to have it follow that curved part. Okay, so I'm going to come up here and show you as well from perspective what happened to it. Okay, so it just continued the base and it made it sort of a more of a triangular shape going up. There's an angled part to it now instead of it being curved. So to correct that, I'll need to put splines in between there. Okay, so what I'll actually need to do is, even though there's a spline right here that is pretty close to where that little dip is, where it curves out from, you're going to need one in there. Because they won't be the same size, you won't have to worry about overlapping geometry, hopefully. So I'm going to copy and paste one of them. Okay, and I'm going to bring that up here. And I'll zoom in here so you can see. Okay, I'm going to take that spline, and it's going to be very close to that one at the top of the more rounded rectangular base here. I'm going to scale that down to match where that curve begins. Okay, a little bit more, and I'm going to hit E to move that down. So T to scale, E to move it down. So you can see there's the spline for the top of my base right there, which is circle 3 here. Okay, and this new one on top. Okay, now you'll notice I'm copying and pasting, so it's calling all of them right now circle 3, which could be a problem. So I'm going to rename this guy after I place this one. Okay, so this one I'm going to pull it in and make sure. Now there's two here. There's this one and that one. This one is not in the loft yet. So this one is the first circle 3, and this one is the second circle 3, this one has to go in the middle. So you can see how this will get confusing if you're not careful. So this is the original circle 3 right here. Okay, this will be 4, so I'm going to rename it 4. And this one here that's all the way up here, I'm going to rename that one 5. Okay, so that way hopefully I don't get confused. But this is where the loft gets confusing, is when you get your splines out of order. So I'm going to take that one. Okay, it needs to go between this guy and this guy. So I'm going to drop that in there. Okay, and turn it back on. And there's that spline. We'll turn the loft on to see what it looks like. Better. Okay, but I'm going to need another loft spline here to keep creating the curve. All right, so we're going to go, and I'm going to copy circle 4, paste it, put that in there, move it up, scale it. Okay, and you can see now I'm getting the curve. Okay, so when you're not getting a curve, you're just going to have to add more splines. Or if you're not getting the shape you want, it's not always going to be a curve, but when you're not getting the shape you want, you're going to just have to add more splines to carry that shape through. Okay, or else it might get too blocky, or it might look like another shape. But you have to make sure that as you add them in there, you're very careful about the order. Okay, so you can see here, if I turn off the loft, first one, second spline, third spline, fourth spline, fifth spline, sixth spline, seventh spline. They're all in order. Okay, so if you need to add in between, make sure that that ends up happening, because if you don't do that, you'll see that it will twist and invert on itself, and it will look very strange. Okay, so it's something definitely to watch out for. Okay, now the reason that this is not renaming itself anymore is because I'm copying and pasting, and I'm inside the loft, so it's not renaming it for me anymore, which is unfortunate. Okay, so if that's a problem, I would definitely suggest that you name them as you go, so that you don't end up getting confused, because again, that will be very easy to do. So I would name them as soon as you stick them into the loft. Okay, so I'm going to continue up the shape. I know based on what happened down here that I'm going to need to have more than just a spline here. So I'm going to put one in the middle here. Scale it. Okay, put that into my loft. Rename that 6. Okay. Okay, and if you're having trouble with seeing where your splines are, just temporarily turn the loft off, and then you can select your spline, and it will highlight as white. So if you're having a hard time selecting them and seeing which ones they are, then definitely go and do that, so you can see what you're working with if you're having trouble. Okay, copy paste. Continuing up here, scale. Okay, so at this point it should hopefully be looking very straightforward. I'm just going to sort of continue up here. I might not say much as I move along, but I'm just going to keep adding splines. Adding them, resizing them. Okay. Alright, so again, I know I'm going to need more than just the center, so I'm just going to do that preemptively. 1 for the bottom of the curve here. Okay. Put that in here, rename it 9. Copy, paste. Move up. And again, if you're using the shortcuts, this is going to go a lot faster for you. Okay, so I'm using T to scale it and E to move it. If not, you're going to have to keep constantly going up to the toolbar here, and it's going to slow you down. Okay, so depending on how much detail you have is going to determine how many splines you need. You're going to need you're going to need a couple if it has a rounded shape. If it's straight, like this guy when I get up here, I'm probably not going to need many to do this. But to do these rounded parts, I do need at least, looks like I need 3 or 4 to carry that shape. 11. All right, I'll copy and paste this one, do the next one, and then I'll show you what it looks like in perspective. Because it's always good to go back and forth and check what you're doing and see how it's turning out. Okay, so there's the top of that one. Throw it in here. Circle 12. Okay, save. Zoom out. And there we go. It's coming along nicely. Okay, it definitely needs some smoothing, but I'm pretty confident that a subdivision surface is going to fix that. Okay, or just me switching the mesh subdivisions on the loft itself. So it's coming together and it's looking like our reference. So I'm going to come back here to the front view. Just need a couple more splines to finish off this shape. So I'm going to copy my last spline, paste, bring that up. I think we can get away with coming up here. We're going to see. Going to see if it curves enough. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to copy, paste that. Before I do that, I'm going to rename that 13. Bring this one up. Scale. And you can see now that my reference wasn't exactly centered, but it's enough for me to figure out what I'm doing. So this one's 14. So you can see it didn't curve enough to meet the top here, so I'm going to have to put a extra spline in there to taper that in more. So I'm going to copy, okay, and I'm going to bring that one up here. Stick that in between 13 and 14. And there, you see how that fixed it right away. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to continue. Copy, paste 14. Bring it up just a little bit because I want to extend it now to do the bigger side. Okay, it's going to be very similar to the bottom, so I'm going to have a couple here that are close. These two are close together, but we do have the rounded edge, so I'm going to need 2 here and 2 there. Let's put that in there. 15. Bring that up, scale it out a little bit. Okay, copy, paste. Bring this one way up to the top here. Okay, drop that into our loft, rename it 17, and it looks like I just need one more to finish that off. Scale it down a little bit. Okay, and drop that in there. 18. Okay, it looks like I have my full piece now. There we go. Okay, now again, I know it doesn't look as smooth, but we're gonna see if we can just adjust the settings a little bit to make that work out. But you can see from our reference now, we're looking pretty similar to what we were looking to create. Okay, they look very similar, which is great. Okay, and you can tell that it looks like I had about 20 or so splines, because again, some of these I didn't rename. So a lot of splines, a lot to keep track of, putting in order, but you know, when it comes together, it's worth the effort. This would have been difficult to do otherwise. You in this case, this is something you could have done with a lathe as well, because it is symmetrical. So something to think about. But it's you know, to do something like this with a loft as well is entirely possible. It's nice here because you have the different, you have the sharper spots versus the rounder spots. So it's nice to be able to create that with the loft and using different splines if you needed to. But technically for this example, you could have tried a lathe as well because it is symmetrical on both sides. So something to think about. The other example of the king, that one is you would have to do with lofts. The cross at the top would prove a problem for a lathe. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at my subdivisions and I'm going to change. Let's see. I'm going to put the lines on. I don't think I need more in the V. I'll put this to 8 though. I think what we would want is more in the U. Let's say I make it 32. Let's see. And that definitely helps a lot. Okay, but before I do that, I'll undo it. So 16, and this was 4, I think. I want to see if a subdivision surface will do the job, because that's a separate object. I can turn it on and off, so that's nice. Easy to remember what I did. Yeah, and I think as long as it doesn't change the shape down here, which it doesn't look like it did, I think it kept the shape. Sometimes you have to watch out with the subdivision surface that it does, you know, if it made the sharper parts too round or something like that, that would be an issue. But it looks like it literally just smoothed everything out that I have. So I'm gonna stick with the subdivision surface here. But if you have a subdivision surface and it does too much, then you could come into the loft and you could up the U and the V here. The U is for what you're going to need for the top to get it the circle smoother. So you could adjust that as well and see how that does for your shape. Okay, but there's my finished chess piece. Looks a lot like my reference. I was able to successfully do it with a loft. So you can recreate this exact same chess piece. You can try the king, which is a little bit more challenging, or you could grab another one, but you have to use a loft. Okay, so a knight is not a good chess piece. A bishop is not a good chess piece for these kind of things, because you've got the they're not uh, they're not going to lend themselves to using the loft that easily. So you're going to create a chess piece using the loft object, and hopefully this helps to explain. I know it's a little bit more confusing than the other ones, but it's definitely, once you get the hang of it, it's a super useful tool.